So how can we deal with our constantly increasing debt problem? Well, let's look at the root of the problem. Debt increases when we have deficits. So to start with dealing with our debt, we need to turn deficits into surpluses. So we need to start making more money in the revenue than we're spending. How do we do that? We can either raise revenue through manipulating taxes, or we can reduce government spending. So let's look at each one of these possibilities. How is the revenue related to the size of the tax? We have such thing that we call a Laffer curve that shows the relationship between the size of the tax and the tax revenue. So if we try to represent graphically the relationship between the size of the tax and tax revenue, it will look something like this. What does this graph tells us? It tells us that when the tax size is pretty small, increasing it will raise tax revenue. How does this happen? Let's say the current tax rate is 5%. If you increase it to 10%, now people paying 10% of their income instead of 5% of the income towards the tax. As a result, government collects more money. But it also says that once the tax revenue reaches a certain point, when it gets too large, increase in tax is going to reduce tax revenue. So this curve says that there's two possibilities. You can increase tax and increase tax revenue, or you can decrease the tax when it's already too large and increase tax revenue as well. The problem is we're still not sure at which side of this curve we are located. Some economists believe we can still raise taxes and increase tax revenue, and some believe that we can decrease tax and raise tax revenue. So those that believe that decrease in taxes, current taxes, will increase the revenue are called supply side economists. They argue that cutting taxes will increase productivity and increase economic well-being. So cutting taxes may increase government revenue. So far, this theory was not confirmed by any of the existing studies. So a lot of times proponents of this theory are talking about the times when Reagan cut taxes and as a result we saw increase in government revenue. But we have to be very careful about that. During the time when Reagan cut taxes, economy was doing pretty well. So we're still not sure whether or not those increase in the revenue was a result of taxes that were cut, or it was a result of a good economic conditions that stimulated people to produce more and as a result pay more taxes. So if we believe the other theory that increase in taxes will lead to the increase in the revenue, then we can try to increase taxes. Well, anybody wants to do that? Not so many people do. Not so many presidents or politicians want to do that either. So a lot of times when we think about increasing taxes, that's going to hurt politicians' chances to be re-elected. And a lot of those politicians are motivated by re-election. So nobody really wants to try this strategy either. So the next thing to do is probably to try to cut government spending. Government spending can be divided in two parts. One is discretionary spending and another one is non-discretionary or mandatory spending. Mandatory is the spending that we can't avoid paying. So you have an example of a US federal spending for year of 2012. In year of 2013 it probably was looking pretty similar to this. So if we look at our mandatory spending, we have to pay Social Security, we have to pay Medicare and Medicaid. We can't avoid paying those costs. There's some other mandatory spending as well. The net interest, as we said, it was about 6%, so we have to pay our debtors. And all of that is going to be spending that we cannot avoid. So where can we actually cut spending? We can cut discretionary spending, something that we're simply deciding to spend money on. So defense spending and other discretionary spending would be those two things that we can cut. So let's look a little bit more closely into discretionary spending. So if you include the military spending in all the other categories, this is how this pie chart is going to look like. So we have about 56% would be going towards the military spending, and everything would be towards food and agriculture, transportation, labor, science, energy, international affairs, health, weather and benefits, governments, I guess, towards the salaries, and education, such as subsidies and other things. So among these categories, which spending would you cut? Which category do you think if you cut, it's really going to help us to reduce our debt? It's a tricky question. It's not an easy question to answer. And that's why we're still dealing with this problem of persistent deficit and constant increase in public debt. So I hope this lecture leaves you with more questions than answers. As with many other things in economics, we can't find a definite answer to things. We have to think through every single situation that we're analyzing. It's not easy to make right decisions. But to summarize our lecture in the government, we can say one thing. Good government is good. So government has this potential to enhance the productive capacity of our economy and make us better off as a result. Size of the government is not necessarily going to determine its effectiveness. It's not necessary to have large government that spends a lot of money in order for it to be effective. Sometimes we want the government involvement, and sometimes we want government to stay away from certain situations, certain markets. The reason for it is that even the best intentions may result in negative outcomes. So the more government intervention we see, the more of this kind of results we're going to see as well. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't see any government intervention at all. As we looked at through this lecture, there are a lot of situations in which government involvement is good. But we have to make sure that that involvement is